Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library. My name is Gina Duvernay, Adult Services Manager. Thank you for joining our exciting author talk. Tobias Rose-Stockwell is a writer, designer, and media researcher whose work has been featured in major outlets such as The Atlantic, Wired, NPR, the BBC, CNN, and many others. His research has been cited in the adoption of key interventions to reduce toxicity and polarization within leading tech platforms. He previously led humanitarian projects in Southeast Asia focused on Civil War reconstruction efforts, which he was honored with an award from the 14th Dalai Lama. Tobias lives in New York with his cat, Waffles. Please welcome Tobias Rose-Stockwell.
Hello, my name is Tobias. Thank you so much for having me today, speaking with you about my book. I'm here to tell you a story about liberal democracy, and something that we know of, we are very familiar with, I think, from the world in which we all grew up. I want to bring you back to 1989, a time of great optimism. The fall of the Berlin Wall had just happened. The Iron Curtain was torn open, and Francis Fukuyama famously said that liberal democracy was the final form of human government, that we would find ourselves in increasing quantities of democratic norms around the world, and find ourselves in a future that we had basically figured it out in terms of how society should be operating. Brexit, Trump, something happens. We are now in a new world. The root of this, you can see what's happening here. The difference between autocratizing countries and democratizing countries. There was a shift that happened here. And beginning in around 2009, there's a dramatic fall off in the number of democratizing countries and an increase in the number of autocratizing countries. Can you see this now, this transit?
Yes, we can.
Great, awesome, excellent, thank you. So I believe this is because we left one world with one set of rules and entered a new one with different rules. And you can see that on social media, this is the time in which we began entering into this world. You are not just here, you are in this other world now. I went through these stats. This is my book. This is my article I wrote with John. And these are the different technologies. Okay. So let's go down. So hypervirality. Okay, so this is moral outrage and virality. For every moral and emotional keyword used, it'll bring a 17% increase in diffusion per word used. So you can see that punish children, shame, diabolical, evil, lie, all of these are moral and emotional words, and they provide a 17% boost to diffusion for each one of these words used. So it turns out false information is also viral information. Okay, so this is a quote from Mark Twain: "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its pants on." This also is actually a fake quote that doesn't really exist. This was an apocryphal quote that could not be attributed to Mark Twain, but it does turn out that false information does receive a 5x advantage in diffusion versus true information. So it naturally has a viral advantage that we cannot ignore in our information environment. So it turns out that even in a regular conversation, even in the real world, truth is very hard. We are wrong before we are right, okay? But our species has a superpower. We are able to see the faults in other people's arguments and claims better than we can see our own. So when our claims interact and hit each other, we get a more accurate claim as a result of good faith refutation. But what happens if, instead of this kind of circle of trust that allows for good faith refutation, we instead assemble grandstands on the side of each of our conversations? From this point, we no longer are focusing on the core of the argument and the truth. We are actually focusing on what our followers might think. So the result is not actually better conversations and better accurate information. The result is appeals to my followers and appeals to your followers, and public performance and moral grandstanding. And this has happened across the board with many, many, many conversations, right? All of these conversations that we maybe used to have in private or in small groups, we all surrounded by our followers. We are surrounded by people that can give us likes, follows, retweets, shares, comments. And so we appeal naturally to the biases of these audiences instead of the core truth of what we're focusing on. So this goes back to a very specific set of features that were launched as social media companies around 2009. The principal one being the visible use of numerical followers, likes, comments, and shares. So the visibility of these people in our immediate digital environments has actually fundamentally changed how we act in these environments. Okay, so Justin Rosenstein, the founder or the creator of the like button at Facebook, he famously said, "I wanted to make positivity the path of least resistance" when he created the like button. So we think we're simply passing on positivity to other people when we're giving each other likes. And on their surface, likes are great. Likes are fantastic. They're cheap for me. They're valuable for you. They're a great signal for developers. We think they're great straight out of the box. But by passing positivity on to other people, we're actually training each other. So in a famous series of experiments in the 1930s, psychologist B.F. Skinner found that if he put rats into a box and he flashed a light and gave them a paddle to press, if they pressed the paddle after the light flashed, the rats would get a food pellet and they would become trained to press the pellet and get this food. What he found was that if the rats were consistently rewarded for pressing the button when the light flashed, they actually began to get bored, and they would go on and do whatever else they wanted to do. But if the rewards were slightly random, then the rats would get obsessed with pressing the paddle. They would try to figure out the pattern and keep pressing the button, trying to get as much, trying to figure out the pattern. They would go basically obsessed with it. Now, these are called intermittent variable rewards. They lead us to continue to seek stimulus. Now, there's the byproduct of this, of course, is in our apps and feeds. When we post things online, we're not sure what we're going to get. So we constantly want to check and see what it is that we're going to actually receive from our audiences. There's another industry that figured this out a long time ago. We can put a bunch of people in a room, give them a flashing light and a button to press, and they will spend thousands of hours and thousands of dollars just pressing that button over and over again. So this is not just about what we do as individuals. I can pull a broader example here, a rather famous example from someone that we're very familiar with. This is Trump on Twitter in 2011. Now, Trump has been in the public eye for a very long time. He was a Democrat, he was an independent. And over a period of time, you can look back at his tweets in this era, and you can see that at one point he had a very standard Twitter profile. Watch my appearance on Good Day New York, tweet your questions for the next Trump blog, my thoughts on Anthony Weiner. And you can see on average he was getting maybe around 50 retweets and maybe 30 likes per post around that time. But on July 14th, he tweeted something incendiary. He was angry, he was watching Fox News, and he said, "What is better advice, the art of the deal or rules for radicals? I know which one Barack Obama prefers." Suddenly, this tweet gets 2,000 retweets and 3,000 likes. And as a general signal processing machine, like we all are, finding this kind of feedback from an audience is hugely impactful to us, right? So you can see soon after that, just a few days later, he tweets something about Barack Obama dealing, selling guns to Mexican drug lords. And in that process, he begins to actually to lean into this new audience that he has found online. This is called audience capture. 2,000 retweets, 3,000 likes for each of these posts. Now, all of us are beholden to these various metrics. We all actually respond incredibly well to finding an audience online. We all want to be seen by our audience and to find the attention and appreciation of our audience. And this is a way in which this happens. But if you look at the key to his the tenor of these tweets, is there's a kind of an undercurrent of threats here, right? Barack Obama has sold guns to Mexican drug lords. That's a scary thought. Now, threats do something very strange, right? So like moral language tends to be a very threatening type of language. We don't necessarily think about it as threatening, but when we see a lot of moral language online, it actually tends to threaten our identity groups. So it turns out we are not, our identity groups are not stuck in place. We actually have many, many different identities. You might have a sports team that you identify with, a regional identity, a cultural identity, a religious identity, a sexual identity, professional identity, et cetera, et cetera. And these identities are quite elastic in that they actually change over time depending on the context in which you are in, right? So if you're around a whole bunch of people from your particular region or from your political group, then those identities might become more salient. Or if you're around a whole bunch of people that share your political opinions, for instance, the other identities will fade into the background and your political identity will become far more salient, okay? And this is a byproduct of a natural human disposition towards finding identities. And it's a really powerful tool that we have to feel connected to one another. It's kind of like a magical elastic band that we can throw around audiences and people that we share a common cause with. And you can create identities as well. It's a very powerful tool we have. But something happens when these identities come under threat. When our identities are threatened, they are hardened in place. Okay, so there's a perceived threat. Basically, a rigidity comes around the identity and we feel very, very strongly about it. And we do something very predictable when that happens. We venerate the in-group and we denigrate the threatening out-group. And for a while, for a long period of time, that identity becomes a very salient, very rigid thing that we cannot pull away from. You can see this happening. This happened here in New York City around, and also in America at large during the attacks of 9/11, when all of a sudden the city overnight went from being a rather liberal bastion of multiple identities to being, no, we are one identity. We are New Yorkers, and we are under attack. Similarly, America, patriotism and nationalism went through the roof after 9/11. So this isn't all just daisies and roses and good things for our collective. There's something else that happens here when we are exposed to too many identity threats, is that we have an authoritarian disposition, an authoritarian switch in which we actually stop believing in some of the core tenets of liberal democracy, and we actually start defaulting to an authoritarian disposition. Karen Stenner, Duckett, and Feldman have found this in many different ways, that authoritarian dispositions tend to come under times of identity threats. So I want to share that this is one of the byproducts of being in something I call a viral network. Okay, this kind of collection of issues are representative of viral network. Outrageous and viral stories outcompete verifiable facts. Public performance becomes the new norm of communication, and threats to identity groups become defining fears. And again, if we go back to this graph from before, the number of people using social media platforms between 2009 and 2018, it actually correlates fairly directly with the number of autocratizing countries and the slide in democratizing countries. So if we look back at history, we can find that viral networks have existed before, right? So there's usually, with new technology, there's a period of expansive explosion of new viral information. There's usually chaos and sometimes violence in the wake of that new explosion of viral information. And sometimes it defaults to an authoritarian network because people cannot deal with that many wild accusations and disconcerting narratives flying around. And they basically default to this authoritarian default that I mentioned before. It doesn't always go this way. Sometimes these viral networks are able to be turned into what I call knowledge networks. Now, knowledge networks have a different frame. You would recognize them because we all grew up within knowledge networks. Knowledge networks exist in institutions like academia, journalism, science, historically. They are powerful systems in which many individuals and institutions with clear reputational risk call each other out for mistake and biases with accountability. The result for all of us is better information. Now, I believe we are at one of these transition points right now where it feels like the virality and chaos is almost too much, and there is clearly an authoritarian trend, and there are also trends towards trying to make our existing network of social media more like a knowledge network, and I want to speak about those things. There are things that we can do to help make that happen. So there's things at the government level, at the platform level, and at the individual level. At the government level, there's a piece of legislation working its way through Congress right now called the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, otherwise known as PATA, which will make the harms of social media companies more visible to civil society and academia, to basically give access to the data to understand just how much social media is polarizing us, just how much it is influencing our behavior, and just how problematic it really is in society. On the platform level, I want to explain how you might turn a viral network like social media into a knowledge network. The core to this is trying to create a system in which users can, in good faith, call each other out to improve the claims of other users. And this is a core problem with misinformation online that we are actually faced with every day, which is the quantity of mis and disinformation has gotten to such a point that people do not know what to think. There's a level of cynicism, a level of fear in our current information environment, which is extremely dangerous and problematic. Now, I want to quote Jonathan Rauch from the Constitution of Knowledge here. He's whose work I cite in the citation of the knowledge networks, and saying that the system did not assemble itself by some automatic social magic. It was the product of hard-fought battles and hard-won norms and institutions. Many people suffered and bled for it along the way. It is not self-maintaining. It relies upon an array of sometimes delicate social settings, understandings, and those need to be understood, affirmed, and protected. So what do knowledge networks look like in our current informational environment? We actually have some examples of these being deployed in a way that is very, I think, hopeful. We're all familiar with Wikipedia. It is as accurate as most any encyclopedia you can find around the world. Studies show it's very accurate. It is free and available to everyone. And core to this is the way that it allows for people to, in good faith, make claims, add context, and refute those claims in a systematic fashion. It is a powerful tool that makes a huge difference in how we look at historical information because of the way it's designed and the norms of that institution that were put in place. You can also see the beginnings of knowledge network designs being deployed at a few social media companies right now, notably X, which formerly known as Twitter, which is community notes, which is community-driven fact-checking. If you can see this, this is someone quoting, "Whales are not actually mammals. If humans can't drink seawater, just try it. How can sea mammals, like whales, stay hydrated?" And readers can actually collectively add context to this. And the way this works is that it is not a majority rule of the information. It's actually a majority that found the information useful can then vote on the context that is added to the tweet. And it actually has a very good hit rate in terms of success in showing people good and accurate information. You're seeing this as an emergent mediating force in many notable tweets. That people will actually correct what they said previously based on what Community Notes has done to offer corrections. So the other things that we can do, we can reduce the incentives for public performance by hiding metrics. This reduces the need to feel socially validated by the system and turns down the popularity contest. It creates less external pressure to be seen as right and less gladiatorial combat in online discussions. And then better verification. Currently verification has taken a huge step backwards under Elon and what's going on at Twitter. I think that you can actually create much better verification by finding superordinate identities, or identities that do not default to tribal biases and kind of contentious issues, but finding superordinate identities that are actually additive and helpful to the conversation. So something like having scientists be able to be polled on the veracity of a particular claim, or academics being able to be polled on the veracity of a particular claim. That could improve the signal processing in these systems and avoid the partisan default and the polarization that comes in all of our online environments these days. Another thing we can do is improving the way that information spreads, so actually slowing down viral sharing on social media. So this is how a rumor works on social media. It's discovered through a single click, it's amplified, and it is spread to a larger audience onward, right? If you just slow that down, if you slow down friction, if you put points of friction in place where it slows down the number of shares that can actually be had for a specific piece of information, you can actually just turn down the volume of the quantity of mis and disinformation and outrageous information that transits on the platform. And that, in conjunction with something like Community Notes, can allow for the community to verify and validate that that particular tweet. So what's important about this is egalitarian and accessible for everyone. And I think that the norms of our democracies need to be reflected in the norms of our social media tools, because we are spending so much time in these digital spaces. We might as well call them physical spaces, and we might as well treat them like they are our institutions that we cherish now, and demand the same types of norms and designs that can help us cohabitate there better. So I think something that we can do as individuals is notice the regret signals that are present. So ask yourself if you feel worse after using these tools. The feeling of regret is a very important emotion. So if you are stuck scrolling your phone, you find yourself in one of these moments of just kind of disgust, you've been stuck in a feed for 5 or 6 hours, you want to throw your phone away, use that moment to actually recondition, change the settings on your phone, turn off notifications. There's an app that I use called OneSec, which I really love. It just forces me to take a deep breath before I enter into triggering apps. So use these moments of regret to actually reformat your relationship with these tools. I delete the apps from my phone very regularly. I will reinstall them when I need them for something very specific. But in general, I try to be really just careful with my usage of these tools, because when I'm tired, when I'm sad, when I'm hungry, that is when the algorithms get us. That is when they pull us in, and that is when they do the most damage. And when it comes to making sense of the world, I think that it's important to assume that you're getting the worst version of events from social media. The news might get faster, it might be coming faster for you, but it will not be more accurate, more nuanced, or more real. Usually time discovers truth. The longer we have a piece of information, the more opportunities there are for it to be fact-checked, validated, contextualized, and understood. And that is a critical piece of what's missing in our current information environment. With the speed at which information flows, it becomes very difficult for us to process and really understand what is happening. Instead, we just react to what is happening, and we can actually do much to make that better. And finally, there's a mantra that I love from my colleague Jonathan Haidt at NYU. I will take less offense, I will give less offense, I will pass on less offense. Repeating that regularly, taking deep breaths when I'm triggered, goes a long way in helping to solve these problems. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me here, and you can get on my mailing list, outragemachine.org. You can follow me on social media if you so choose, or you can email me at tobiasrose@gmail.com. And I'm available for questions from here. Thank you.
I just have a couple of questions of my own.
Sure.
This took extensive research, and so I'm just curious how long that took for you.
The book was a very long process. I mean, I started writing about this stuff in 2015, where I was just recognizing some of these transitions that were happening online. I had lived and worked in Silicon Valley for a long time. And so I think it really began in 2015, but I started writing publicly about it around the time of the 2016 election. And that was when I really started to, okay, now this is a huge new area that needs to be focused on. And I would say like 6 to 7 years has been my process. The actual book took about that long from kind of inception to publication. So yeah.
Wow. Well, we are glad you put in the time.
Thanks.
Because this was quite fascinating. It's really interesting to pay attention to what we don't pay attention to. Really. Also, I was curious. Do you know, or do you know if, like, now that Twitter has changed to X, has its usership declined? Have people used that platform less?
As far as I know, the numbers are actually still pretty steady there. There was a period of decline, and there's substantial advertising revenue decline, but the network effects of Twitter are actually very, very powerful. So people still keep coming back, and I think people are definitely tweeting and posting less because I think they feel a little bit gross about it now, and maybe people are just kind of frustrated with the leadership and direction there. But it remains to be seen how it'll land. I'm hopeful that Elon and his teams will figure out how to make it a better place. But yeah, it's a sad state of affairs in its current form, unfortunately, and I'm hopeful that it turns around. So yeah.
Yes, indeed. Let's see. We do have a couple of questions. One is from Merwin, and his question is there a safe way to verify the information I choose to share is accurate? And I have on occasion deleted posts I found out later were inaccurate.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that finding a primary source from a reputable publisher is really critical. Reputations are hard to build in the news industry, right? And there are kind of foundations of the journalistic process that are actually really great, that just involve just basic corroboration of existing facts. So I think most of the time, if a mainstream or kind of mainstream digital media site shares something, usually that is going to be fact checked. That does not include opinion pieces. That does not include analysis. And there are some really unfortunate, like pernicious incentives to amplify outrageous content, even for journalists and news producers these days. But the basic process of verification, like traditional media has huge disincentives for actually lying. There's context collapse, and there's a bunch of kind of fuzzy things that happen around the edges, but actually sharing unverified information is not something that they will regularly do. That is very rare, and they will be called out on it a lot. Which is why the kind of core tenet of knowledge networks is that people are actually very accountable for what they say. Now, that's not the same thing for a lot of these kind of digital first publishers who actually share a tremendous amount of unverified information very quickly and very regularly. And that's problematic because they don't have reputations, and in that process, they don't have reputations to hurt, right? So they can just share out whatever they want. So I generally wait until something has enough time to be verified and validated, and just to look for these systems of accountability, right? Like, do you think of this particular newspaper has a reputation that has been around long enough to be trusted? And I think that, or this particular news organization has a reputation that's been around long enough to be trusted, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, we have a couple of other questions. How do you feel about the use of Facebook in other countries as the effective everything app?
Yeah, so I think I think she's speaking about Free Basics, which is basically a thing that was rolled out in other countries where they basically provided free access to the internet as long as Facebook was your primary browser. So you basically, they don't have a Chrome browser they open up. They basically open up Facebook and they use that as their browser for the internet. I think that's really messed up and not a good use of advertising dollars, because what it is, it's serving up what is basically the worst version of Facebook for the rest of the world as their primary information source, and that is not a good thing. It's not great if you think about if all of your information was mediated through Facebook and you didn't have a choice when you're trying to search the internet, you're searching Facebook instead. I think that's a pretty bad way of accurately giving people, information and news. There's a lot of problems with algorithmic prioritization of incendiary content. There's also a lot of real problems with abuse in many of these countries. And what I mean by abuse is that the moderation tools that we have as Americans are actually, like, Facebook spends a lot of money and a lot of time on making sure that you're not seeing hate speech, that you're not seeing terrible content like car crashes and pornography and all of these things. They spend a lot of time doing that. In other countries, they actually don't spend nearly the same resources on it. So they're usually getting the worst version of Facebook. And they have the least say in what they get as well, because these companies are not based there. They have very small staffs in these countries, and as a result, they're actually oftentimes getting really negative results. So, yeah.
This is from Linda. With Gen Z now able to vote, what is the best way for them to do their political homework?
Wow. Well, that's a big question. I think in terms of our politics right now, it's just like a pretty polarized position. I think that teaching Gen Z the difference between a clickable viral TikTok and a verified news story is very, very, very important, right? Because rumor goes wild on TikTok, rumor goes wild on social media, and it's really critical to explain the difference between a viral network and a knowledge network. That, like, TikTok viral videos, they don't have any incentive to verify content as it's spreading, right? There's a small number of moderators on there that might try to downrank false content, but it doesn't happen fast enough much of the time. So don't make voting decisions based on what you see on social media. That would be my primary point of advice.
Good advice. Okay, another question. What do we do about the rise of extremists in more traditional media like television, newspapers?
Yeah.
What about the effects of podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Look, I think that there's two buckets of how we get information from traditional sources, right? There's the straight news bucket and there's the opinion bucket. And I think that you should assume that there's a difference between those things. Sometimes it's blurred. A lot of journalists like to give their opinions along with the straight news, but what I keep coming back to in this whole process is, in the whole process of researching this book, is just recognizing how problematic mis and disinformation can be. So if there is a particular pundit or a particular podcaster or a particular TV host that is regularly peddling falsehoods, then I think that they should be they should get less play in traditional social media. They should get less play in traditional media, and that's what knowledge networks do, is they actually demote false information, right, historically. So I hate to put such a kind of a hard line between these things, but yeah, it is a huge problem. And opinion journalism, I think it's fine to have your own opinions, and I think it's fine for people to have your own opinions, but having your own facts is not, that doesn't gel with democratic societies. You need to actually be basing those opinions on factual information. And so bringing it back from the fringes of this debate to factual information, I think is really, really critical for us. And it's doable. I think that's the point of this whole process here, is actually, it's quite doable to bring people back to the common reservoir of facts and reality. And if we don't do that, if we rely upon inflammatory, out of context, emotional information, then we're not going to solve this problem. Those authoritarian slides.
Yes, very good. Well, one more question. The example you used about Wells, was that an example of self-reporting correction, or were others correcting the person's post?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. I can tell you what that was. That was an example post from Community Notes, in which someone was posting about a neutral topic, which is whales, as opposed to a political topic, which is something that's maybe a little more hot button. And this is their example post that they use in the Community Notes feature on Twitter/X. But the way that it works is that there is, you can apply to be a Community Notes moderator or Community Notes member, and once you are in the system, you can, if you see a tweet that is out of context or is misinformed, or it seems to be sharing false information, straight false information, you can flag it for a community note. If that gets to a certain number, then different people can walk into that. Other community notes members can enter in and vote about whether or not that was useful. And it's not by majority rule that those notes are being allowed, about whether agreed with. It's about whether or not they're useful to the largest diversity of audience. So they categorize the different people that are participating in community notes and diversity of audience. And if it reaches the largest diversity of audience and most people find it useful, then it gets added to the tweet. And literally 100% of the community notes that I've seen so far in the wild have been helpful, accurate, rich in context, and really did stop misinformation dead in its tracks. So I don't want to overstate how powerful that might be, because I'm sure it has flaws, as every new product feature does. But I'm very hopeful that if we move in that direction and we put more emphasis on this process of mediating our conversations through community action, then we can actually make a big difference on the misinformation front.
We're just honored that you could share your time with us. I just wanted to see if you had any parting words or anything.
Just thank you so much for having me. This is really fantastic. I just want to leave people with the foundational thought that, like, this is a solvable problem, and we've been here before, and it is not the end of the world. We can figure this out if we can work on it together.
We are glad to hear that. And thank you again for sharing your time with us, and thank you all for joining.